Lucy, what troubles you so deeply?
Mom, she's not well. And it's so cold at home.
Whiteout over Duluth. A truck stop diner hums on generator power. A polished tech CEO, blue eyes behind designer glasses, steps in, then freezes. A small girl in a red beanie hauls trays, breath fogging. A door slams. Cups shatter. A cracked snow globe with a tiny red sled skids to his shoe. Her whisper, "Mom is freezing at home. He can fix systems. Can he save one family tonight?" The interstate closed behind him like a gate in the wind. Grant Ellison eased his SUV into a truck stop lot glazed with ice and stepped out, coat collar lifted against the hiss of lake snow. Duluth was a white blur, the sky and ground the same hard shade of winter. He crossed to the diner's fogged glass, breath a clean plume, blue eyes sharp behind designer lenses. A man who sold certainty for a living, now measuring each step. Inside, the power was running on a stubborn generator. Fluorescents flickered. The air smelled like burnt coffee, fryer oil, and cold wool brought in from the storm. A handwritten sign above the register read, "Heat cycling to conserve. Please be patient." He nodded at the room the way he nodded at boardrooms, a quiet hello without slowing down, then found the last booth not claimed by parkas and tired eyes. His phone, warmed in his palm, blinked with messages stacked like drifts. Airport closed. Board asks for status. Media wants a statement on grid fragility. He slid the screen face down. In the reflection of the window, his profile had the sleek angles investors loved. Dark hair tight at the sides, more volume on top, suit tailored to a frame that stayed disciplined even when flights vanished and plans reshaped. A steel watch winked when he lifted his hand to rub frost off the glass. Out beyond the parking lot lights, the lake was simply gone, taken by the whiteout. A waitress with red knuckles and a brave smile poured coffee until the carafe sighed. "You stuck too?" she asked. "Seems like it," he said. "Grant." "Shauna," she said. "Kitchen's behind. Heat's iffy. You want food? Order fast." He scanned the room. A tow driver nodded over a bowl of chili. Two nurses in scrub jackets sat with their heads touching, sharing a phone with a cracked screen and a photo of a child in a paper crown. A pair of road crew guys dozed upright, cheeks wind-burned, hands still in gloves. The manager, face gray with calculations, walked a tight circle between the register and the pass window, lips moving like he was keeping score of something invisible, sir. The whole place felt like a lung breathing through a straw. Grant took his first sip and let it burn a path to his chest. He could write a policy memo in his sleep about surge capacity, decentralized warming sites, and the cascade of failures that followed a stuck plow on an arterial road. He had built an entire company to keep cities moving when the weather tried to stop them. But policy could not refill a coffee cup. It could not thaw a hallway where tenants wore coats to bed. He set the cup down and looked again, not at screens or maps, but faces. A man in a faded Vikings beanie counted out coins for pie with a kind of embarrassed care. A woman at the counter wore her scarf high, hiding a cough she did not want to share. At the end of the line, a cardboard box held knit mittens in mismatched pairs. A Sharpie sign said, "Take what you need, leave what you can." Someone had left a candy cane taped to the corner of the sign, as if belief could be sweet and small and still count. His phone buzzed again. Operations pinged a back channel. Rolling outages hitting West End. City dispatch asking if we can spin up volunteer rides to clinics. He typed, "Yes. Prioritize oxygen and meds delivery. Route around the viaduct. Offer hazard pay from our fund." Then he forced himself to stop. He was good at fixing systems. He wanted to remember that systems were made of people. The generator hiccuped. A collective inhale held the ceiling up for a heartbeat. Then the lights steadied. Shauna's laugh was quick and loud. "We bribe it with pies," she said, and pushed a slice toward a table of road crew without asking for tickets. The manager frowned, then let it happen. In storms, rules bent, good ones stayed. Grant swallowed the last of his coffee and opened his wallet. Cash was a blunt tool, but it could move things that refused to budge for spreadsheets. He slid a couple of folded bills beneath the saucer, then another inside his coat for later. He told himself it was for whomever needed it first. He told himself he would know who that was when he saw them. The vestibule door groaned and then slammed as if the wind had a temper. A tray somewhere rattled. A cup skittered off a table and rolled in a slow circle before settling at his feet. Conversations thinned, like a radio turned low in a room you suddenly want to hear clearly. The generator droned. Snow polished the windows to white. Grant looked up from the emptiness of his saucer and toward the sound, his hand already half out to steady something he could not yet see. The sound came again. Lighter this time, a small shuffle between tables, the clatter of silverware and the careful balancing act of hands too small for the work they were doing. Grant turned fully toward it. Through the vapor rising off coffee mugs, he saw her, a girl no older than 8 or 9, wearing an oversized parka that swallowed her frame and a red knit beanie pulled low over her ears. Her gloves didn't match. One was striped, the other plain gray, both frayed at the fingertips. The tray she carried trembled like it weighed as much as she did. She moved between booths on tiptoe, breath coming out in quick bursts that clouded around her face. Every few steps, she adjusted her grip, calculating distance and balance with the same precision Grant used when debugging an algorithm. No one said a word to her. The waitress was behind the counter stacking soup bowls. The manager was arguing into the phone about propane deliveries. Patrons pretended not to see, eyes down, spoons stirring nothing. The girl's focus was pure survival. Don't spill, don't slip, don't get sent away. Grant's instinct was analytical first. Why was she here? Child labor? Surely not. Not in this weather, not this late. But logic couldn't explain the pulse that hit him when her boot slid on melted snow and the tray tilted. He was halfway out of the booth before it steadied. She didn't drop it. Her small jaw tightened, and she took another step, her determination the only warmth in the room. When she reached the next table, her knees bent slightly, the tray wobbling. She set it down with the slow precision of someone diffusing something fragile, then turned toward the counter again. Her parka brushed the backs of chairs. Her breath fogged the air. Her boots squeaked faintly on the wet floor. Grant felt something twist in him. Not pity exactly, but recognition. That kind of focus didn't come from play. It came from need. He glanced toward the manager. The man looked up, caught Grant's stare, then looked away, rubbing his temples. It was an old look. People under pressure pretending not to notice something wrong. He'd seen it in boardrooms too, when budgets cut corners and someone muttered, "It's just for now." The next gust came like a slap. The vestibule door banged open again, wind rushing through, scattering napkins across the floor. The generator flickered. The girl flinched, tray in her hands, and one cup jumped the edge, porcelain exploding near her boots. She froze. Everyone did. Then she sank down, whispering apologies that barely made sound. Grant stood. He didn't think about it. He simply moved. His shoes hit the tile near her as he crouched, coat brushing the floor. "Careful," he said quietly. "You'll cut yourself." She didn't look at him, only gathered shards with shaking fingers. Then something round and faintly glittering rolled from her pocket. A small plastic snow globe with a red sled inside. It cracked where it hit the tile, leaking a clear drop of water that traced a tiny river toward her knee. She snatched it up fast, cradling it like something alive. Her eyes, bright and too old for her face, met his for just a second. She nodded once. A mute thank you before tucking the globe safely back into her coat. Grant exhaled slowly. "It's okay," he said, voice steady. "No harm done." She nodded again, but didn't smile. The tray was gone now, the floor damp. Shauna appeared with a towel, sighing. "You all right, honey?" she asked. The girl whispered, "Yes, ma'am," then reached for the next tray. Grant straightened, watching her. "How old are you?" he asked gently. She blinked. "9, she said, voice barely more than a breath. The manager barked from the counter, "She's helping till the rush dies down." His tone tried for authority but cracked halfway. Grant's jaw tightened. He wanted to say something about laws, safety, decency, but he only asked, "Where's your mom?" The girl hesitated, eyes darting toward the door, then down to her mismatched gloves. "Home," she murmured. "She's sick." That word, sick, stayed in the air, heavier than the storm. Grant didn't move for a moment. Outside, the wind screamed against the glass. Inside, a child kept working because no one else would. He sat back slowly, but his mind didn't return to his phone or his company. It stayed with her. The red beanie, the small hands, the cracked snow globe that somehow still held a piece of light. The wind howled again, harder this time, an angry, relentless sound that rattled the diner's thin windows and made the light fixtures hum. Grant's eyes followed the girl as she moved back toward the counter, her boots squeaking across the damp floor. She reached for a new tray with both hands, wobbling under the weight of half-filled mugs. He watched her steady herself with a small breath, the way a surgeon might before a delicate cut. Then the vestibule door slammed once more, a sharp crack echoing through the diner like a warning. Everyone flinched. Steam rose from the kitchen vents. A plate slipped from the pass window and shattered. The girl froze again, shoulders up, and a few coffee cups slid from her tray. One spun, hit the floor, and burst open, liquid splashing across her boots. Grant was already on his feet. The scrape of his chair made a few heads turn, but he didn't care. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, kneeling before her before anyone else moved. "It's okay," he said, crouching beside her. "Hey, slow down." She shook her head quickly, muttering, I'm sorry," as she reached for the shards. Her small hands trembled. She wore fingerless gloves, soaked through at the palms, and the tips of her fingers were red and raw. He caught her wrist gently before she could touch the sharp porcelain. "Don't," he said quietly. "You'll cut yourself." For the first time, she looked at him fully. Her eyes were large and dark, ringed with exhaustion and something older, responsibility far too heavy for her size. "It's fine," she whispered. "I do it all the time." Grant frowned. "You shouldn't have to." He reached for the napkin holder on the counter and began gathering pieces carefully. The girl hesitated, watching him. That's when something small slipped from her coat pocket and hit the tile with a soft click. He reached to pick it up automatically and froze. It was a snow globe, cracked, palm-sized. Inside, a tiny red sled sat half buried in plastic snow. A few flakes were stuck to the fracture lines like frost on glass. The girl gasped softly and reached for it. "Please," she whispered, clutching it tight when he handed it over. "Please don't let it break more." Grant's voice softened. "Is it yours?" She shook her head. "It was Mom's," she said, holding it close like a secret. "She said when I shake it, it snows quiet, even when it's loud outside." The words landed heavy in his chest. "That's a beautiful thing to say." The girl nodded solemnly. "It still snows quiet, sometimes." She tucked the globe back into her coat, the cracked side facing her body. He wanted to ask more, how long she'd been here, how no one had stopped this, but the manager's voice cut through the silence. "Everything okay over there?" Grant stood, jaw tightening. "She slipped," he said evenly. The manager's eyes flicked toward the girl, then away. "She's fine," he said too quickly. "She's helping until the rush ends. The roads are closed. Couldn't get night staff in." "That doesn't make this okay," Grant said, his tone calm but sharp enough to draw attention. The man sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, we're just trying to get through the storm, all right? Nobody's forcing her." The girl's small voice cut through. "I said I could help." Grant looked at her, seeing the pride and fear tangled together. "You shouldn't have to," he said softly. Her lip quivered, and she looked away, gripping the snow globe through her coat pocket. Shauna appeared again, holding a dish towel. "We've all been there, mister," she said gently, but there was apology in her eyes. "Sometimes help comes small." Grant crouched again, his voice quiet enough that only the girl heard. "What's your name?" "Lucy," she whispered. "Well, Lucy," he said. "You did your best. Let's clean this up, okay?" Together, they gathered the last shards, the clink of porcelain against glassware fading under the storm's moan outside. When he rose, his reflection met hers in the dark window. Two figures in a sea of white, both fighting something bigger than the cold. He slipped his gloves back on slowly. This wasn't a moment to file away. It was a fracture in the night, a story that wouldn't let him look away. As Lucy lifted the tray again, her small shoulders squared against the weight, Grant made a silent promise. Tonight, she wouldn't carry it alone. Grant reached for the tray before she could lift it. His gloved hands steadied the edge, his voice low but firm. "Let me help you," he said. Lucy blinked, unsure if he was serious. "You don't work here," she murmured. "Maybe not," he said, "but I can still carry something." Her eyes darted toward the counter where the manager stood, pretending to be busy with receipts. She hesitated, then nodded toward a booth near the window. "That one," she said quietly. Grant carried the tray with ease, setting it down on the table. The truckers there gave him a puzzled look, but he only smiled faintly, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. He returned to Lucy and crouched slightly so they were eye level. "How long have you been here tonight?" "Since after school," she said, rubbing her gloved hands together. "They needed help. Everyone's stuck." He glanced around. The place was packed, families stranded by road closures, travelers too cold to risk leaving. The generator hummed unevenly. The heater vents rattled. "Do you get paid?" She nodded, hesitant. "A little. And food." Grant's brows furrowed. "You shouldn't have to do this, Lucy." She looked down, her voice small but steady. "It's okay. Mom says every hand helps when the lights go out." That sentence stopped him. "Where is she now?" Lucy swallowed. "Home. She's sick." He kept his voice calm. "Someone's with her?" She shook her head. "No, but she's got blankets. The heat went off last week." The words tightened something deep in him, and he looked over at the manager again. "She's 9, he said evenly. "You can't let her work here." The manager winced. "Sir, look around. We're barely keeping up. The power trucks haven't cleared the highway since noon." She begged to stay. "I told her it's just until the storm passes." Grant exhaled through his nose. "That's not a reason. It's an excuse." The man opened his mouth, then closed it. "You don't understand. This is Duluth in January. If she goes home, she freezes too." Lucy's voice interrupted, quiet but sharp. "I don't freeze," she said. "I keep moving." Grant turned back to her. She stared at the cracked snow globe peeking from her coat pocket. Her small thumb rubbed the side of it as if polishing something sacred. "It used to be Mom's," she whispered. "When I get scared, I shake it. She says it snows quiet, even when it's loud outside." He crouched again, meeting her gaze. "That's what she tells you?" She nodded. "She says if you keep walking, you always find light somewhere." Grant looked at her for a long moment. The storm outside had dulled the world into shades of white, but in her eyes there was color, stubborn, flickering hope. He reached into his coat, pulled out his phone, and typed a note to himself. "Find 215 Brook Street. Heat outage, medical aid." He stood slowly. "Lucy," he said softly. "What's your mom's name?" "Eva," she replied. "All right," he said, voice steady. "I think Eva and you both deserve some help tonight." He turned toward the counter. "Do you have a landline?" The manager blinked. "Yeah. Why?" "Because I'm calling in some favors." The man frowned, but something in Grant's tone stopped him from arguing. Grant stepped behind the counter like he'd done it 100 times before. He dialed a number from memory. "It's Ellison," he said when someone answered. "Activate the winter relief protocol." "Yes. Now. Duluth." Pull my authorization. I want all open pharmacies, shelter units, and ride availability cross-matched for zip code 55805. Prioritize emergency heat access and medical supplies. I'll cover funding personally." The room went still. Shauna paused mid-step. The truckers glanced over. Grant spoke calmly, efficiently, but his voice carried the quiet weight of authority that made people listen. He handed the phone back. "Lucy," he said, "go sit by the heater for a few minutes, okay? You've done enough." Her lip trembled. "But the dishes—" "They'll wait," he said gently. "You won't." She hesitated, then obeyed. The heat vent in the vestibule groaned to life and she curled beside it, clutching her snow globe tight. For the first time that night, her shoulders loosened. Grant watched her from across the room, the red beanie vivid against the steel-gray world outside. Then he turned to the manager. "I'll leave my card for the meals and the staff," he said. "Just make sure that child doesn't lift another tray tonight." The manager nodded slowly, guilt and relief washing through his face. Grant buttoned his coat and glanced once more toward the small figure by the heater vent. She shook her cracked snow globe and whispered something he couldn't hear. But when the glass caught the dim light, it looked like a tiny storm had finally found peace. Outside, the blizzard thickened until the diner's neon sign blurred into a faint pink smear. Snow drifted higher against the doors, pressing its cold weight like a living thing. Inside, Grant stood near the counter, watching Lucy's small frame by the heater. Her red beanie was too big, sliding over her eyebrows, and her mittens steamed faintly as they dried. He pulled out his phone again. "Tell me when you've got a response," he said quietly into the receiver. His operations chief on the other end was calm, but curious. This was far outside their normal protocol. "I'll explain later," Grant added. "Right now, a family in Duluth needs power, heat, and a medic." He hung up and returned to Lucy. "Hey," he said softly, crouching again so he didn't tower over her. "My team's sending someone to check on your mom. What's your address again?" She hesitated, then whispered, 215 Brook Street, apartment 3. He typed it quickly, repeating it to be sure. "Good, they'll be there soon." Her eyes widened. "Really? Tonight?" "Before midnight," he promised. "We'll make sure she's warm." She nodded, and for the first time he saw a hint of relief, faint but real. Then, like a reflex, she reached into her coat pocket and tapped the cracked snow globe once, as if sealing a wish. Shauna approached carefully, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sir, I don't know who you are," she said, "but if you're calling in help that fast in this weather, you must be someone." Grant smiled faintly. "Just someone who believes we're supposed to look out for each other." The manager, still uneasy, spoke up from behind the register. "I appreciate what you're doing," he said gruffly, "but you should know, we're not running a sweatshop here. It's just, this storm hit harder than expected. Deliveries stopped, 2 cooks couldn't make it in. She came by asking if we needed help and—" He trailed off. Grant's voice stayed calm but firm. "I understand pressure. I don't understand asking a child to solve it." The man looked away. "She insisted. Said she needed cash." Grant turned back to Lucy. "Why didn't you tell anyone your mom was sick?" She looked down, rubbing her gloves together. "Nobody listens," she whispered. "They just say, 'That's hard,' and walk away." Her words cut through him more sharply than the cold outside. He'd built entire systems for efficiency, for routing, predicting, calculating, but none of them had ever been about listening. Not like this. "Then I'll listen," he said. "What does she need most?" Lucy thought for a moment. "Medicine," she said softly. "And heat." Grant nodded. "Both are on the way." The manager shifted awkwardly. "You can't just fix everything, mister." Grant turned toward him. "Maybe not," he said. "But tonight, I can fix this." He took out his wallet, placed a corporate card on the counter, and slid it forward. "Use this for meals, coffee, whatever keeps people warm until morning. Hire temp help if you can. I'll reimburse every cent personally. But Lucy's done working for the night. Agreed? The manager stared at the black card, swallowing hard. Agreed. Grant turned back to Lucy. You hear that? No more trays. Her lips parted in surprise. But what about Mom? She's being helped, he said gently, and you're coming with me to make sure of it. The room fell quiet. The truckers at the corner booth stopped talking. Shauna blinked, unsure she'd heard right. Sir, the manager began carefully, the roads are dangerous. Visibility's nearly zero. Grant buttoned his overcoat and glanced at the storm beyond the door. Then I'll drive slow. He walked to Lucy and extended a gloved hand. Come on, let's get you home. She hesitated, torn between fear and trust, but when he smiled, warm, steady, and confident in a way that seemed to make the storm smaller, she took his hand. Her fingers were cold even through her gloves. Together they pushed open the diner door. A blast of wind hit them like ice shards. Snow whipped around their legs. Grant bent low to shield her as they trudged toward his SUV, headlights buried in drifts. Buckle up tight, he said once they climbed in. She nodded silently, clutching the snow globe in both hands. As the engine roared to life, the heater blasted warm air, fogging the windows. Grant adjusted the defroster and looked at her. You okay? She nodded, eyes fixed on the swirling storm outside. It's snowing quiet, she whispered. He smiled faintly. Then let's keep it that way. The SUV rolled onto the frozen highway, its headlights cutting tunnels through the white. Behind them, the diner's faint glow disappeared into the blizzard, but ahead, somewhere out there, was apartment 3 at 215 Brook Street, and the woman who'd taught her daughter to believe quiet snow could still mean hope. The city beyond the windshield was unrecognizable. Just the faint glow of traffic lights buried under snow, their colors muted into pale ghosts. The wipers struggled against the storm, groaning under the weight of ice. Grant leaned forward, scanning for street signs, while Lucy's small face glowed faintly in the dashboard light. She clutched her snow globe tightly, as if it anchored her to something safe. Your heater okay? He asked gently. She nodded. It's warm in here. Then, after a pause, Mom says cars are like little houses when the power goes out. He smiled faintly. She's right about that. The phone mounted on his dash chimed softly. A message appeared from his operations team. Relief API active. 1 nurse en route. Portable heater and groceries dispatched. ETA 15 minutes. He exhaled, a mix of relief and disbelief. He'd built those systems for crisis response but never imagined testing them this personally. He looked at Lucy. You did the right thing tonight. You know that? Her eyes flicked toward him. For what? For helping. For keeping going. She shrugged. You just do what you have to. He smiled at the simple truth of that. For a child, she spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who had already weathered too many storms. When they finally reached Brook Street, Grant slowed to a crawl. Snow had swallowed the curbs and buried the cars up to their mirrors. The power was clearly out. No porch lights, no glow from apartment windows, just the dull reflection of headlights bouncing off walls of white. He parked, grabbed a flashlight from the glove box, and stepped out into the wind. The air was so cold, it burned his lungs. Lucy followed close behind, holding his sleeve as they trudged toward the building. Inside, the hallway was dark and smelled faintly of wet wool and old radiator heat that had died hours ago. Their footsteps echoed. At the end of the hall, a faint cough came from behind a thin wooden door marked 3. Lucy ran ahead. Mom! Grant followed fast. She was already fumbling with the knob when he caught up and pushed the door open. The air inside was frigid. A small window rattled against its frozen frame. Blankets were piled on a thin mattress where a woman lay half sitting, half slumped, her lips pale blue at the edges. The room's single-space heater sat silent in the corner, its indicator light dark. Grant crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt beside the bed. Eva? He asked softly. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, weak. Lucy? She murmured. Mom, I'm here, the girl said, dropping her snow globe onto the bed and grabbing her mother's hand. "It's okay, Mom. He helped me." Eva's eyes drifted to Grant, confusion cutting through the fog of fever. "Who?" "Friend," he said quickly. "We'll get you warm." He moved to the outlet, checking the heater. The breaker was tripped, the fuse blown. He swore under his breath, then pulled out his phone. "This is Ellison. We're inside the unit. Patient's conscious but hypothermic. Where's that nurse?" The reply came fast. 4 minutes out. He grabbed an extra blanket from a chair, shook off the frost, and wrapped it around Eva's shoulders. Lucy stood beside him, holding her mother's hand tight. "Mom," she whispered, "it's snowing quiet again." Eva's lips curved faintly. "Good," she breathed. The flashlight beam caught the snow globe beside her pillow, cracked but still glowing faintly in the reflection of the phone's screen. Grant couldn't look away. The symbol felt almost deliberate now, as if it had followed them both to this exact moment. When the knock came on the door, he nearly sighed in relief. The nurse, a woman in a heavy parka with a Red Cross armband, entered quickly, carrying a portable oxygen tank and a thermal blanket. "Vitals first," she said briskly. "You did good calling it in fast." Grant stepped aside. "She's been without heat for days." The nurse nodded grimly. "Lucky she's still responsive." Lucy hovered near the bed, watching the nurse work. Grant placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll move her somewhere warm," he said quietly. "I promise." The nurse glanced up. "There's a heated motel off Ridgeway. Emergency voucher program's open tonight." "Book it," he said. "I'll cover it personally." She nodded and adjusted the oxygen tube gently over Eva's nose. Within minutes, the room began to feel less like a place of fear and more like transition, a space between danger and safety. When they carried Eva toward the door, wrapped in blankets, Lucy walked beside her, one small hand gripping her mother's wrist, the other clutching the snow globe like a talisman. As they stepped into the hallway, Grant looked back once. The heater's light flickered on faintly, as if in gratitude before going still again. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get her to warmth." Outside, the storm had softened to a steady white curtain. Their footprints pressed deep into the snow as they crossed to the SUV. For the first time that night, Lucy smiled. Tired, small, but real. Grant met her gaze in the dim light. "Almost there," he said, and she whispered back, "It's snowing quiet again." Grant eased the SUV onto the snow-choked street, heater blasting, windshield fogging with each breath. Lucy sat beside him, bundled in a blanket, the cracked snow globe balanced in her lap. In the back seat, Eva lay reclined beneath layered quilts, her breathing shallow but steadier now under the nurse's careful eye. The nurse, her name was Daria, kept one hand on Eva's pulse and the other gripping a thermos of hot tea. "She'll be all right once we get her somewhere heated," she said. "Her temperature's low, but it's rising." Lucy leaned forward. "You promise she won't go away?" Daria looked at her gently. "Not tonight, sweetheart. You found her help in time." Grant's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "You found her help in time." The words echoed in his chest. He'd built emergency systems to save hundreds, maybe thousands, and yet nothing he'd done in a boardroom had ever felt as urgent or as real as this. The motel came into view through the wall of white, a 2-story brick building with lights flickering under a sagging awning. The vacancy sign pulsed weakly through the snow. He parked by the entrance, jumped out, and helped Daria lift Eva carefully into a wheelchair. Inside, the lobby's heat hit like a shock. It smelled of old carpet and instant coffee, but to Lucy, it was paradise. She let out a small sigh as the warmth reached her fingers. Grant approached the desk. The night clerk, a young man with earbuds in, barely looked up. "Storm special," he mumbled. "Emergency shelter," Grant said evenly. "1 night, 2 beds, near the heat source." The clerk squinted. "That'll be—" Grant slid his black card across the counter. "Charge whatever you need." The clerk blinked at the embossed logo, his tone changing instantly. "Of course, sir. Room 103. We'll turn the heat up." Grant gave him a brief nod. When he turned back, Lucy was standing near her mother's chair, rubbing Eva's arm gently. Her beanie had slipped sideways. Stray hair stuck to her damp forehead. Daria adjusted the oxygen tube, checked the monitor once more, and said quietly, "She'll make it. She just needs rest." Grant exhaled slowly. "You've done good work." Daria smiled. "So have you, Mr. Ellison." He glanced at her, caught slightly off guard. "You know me?" She nodded. "Everyone in emergency response knows the Ellison protocols. Your software rerouted my clinic's med shipments last month. Saved 2 lives." He looked down at his gloves, suddenly humbled. "Tonight, it's not software doing the saving." The nurse smiled softly, zipped her coat, and stepped back toward the storm. "Keep her warm," she said, and was gone. In the room, the radiator hummed to life, glowing faint orange. Lucy helped Grant lift her mother gently onto the bed. The thin motel sheets might as well have been silk after the bitter air they'd escaped. Grant adjusted the thermostat higher. "You hungry?" he asked Lucy. She nodded faintly. "A little." He stepped out and returned minutes later with 2 steaming bowls of soup and a small paper bag. "Tomato and noodles," he said, "and something sweet." Lucy opened the bag and gasped. "Chocolate muffins?" He smiled. "Best they had." She tore one in half and handed him a piece. "You should eat 2. He chuckled, taking it. "Thank you, ma'am." While they ate, Eva stirred, eyes fluttering open. Her voice was weak but clear. "Lucy?" "I'm here, Mom," the girl said quickly, holding her hand. Eva's gaze drifted toward Grant, confusion softening into gratitude. "You brought us here?" He nodded. "Just a warm place to get you through the night." Tears gathered in her eyes. "You didn't have to." "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I wanted to." Lucy shifted, holding up the snow globe. "Mom, look, it's still okay." Eva smiled faintly. "It always will be, sweetheart." Grant watched them, a lump forming in his throat. The cracked snow globe caught the light from the bedside lamp, scattering faint reflections onto the wall, tiny fragments of brightness dancing over peeling wallpaper. When Eva drifted back to sleep, Lucy sat curled in the armchair, sketchbook open on her knees. "What are you drawing?" Grant asked softly. "Snow," she said without looking up, "but inside it's warm." He nodded, studying the lines of her small, steady hand. "That's the best kind of snow." The storm outside howled against the glass, but in the little room, everything felt suspended. Quiet, safe, fragile, but whole. Grant stood by the window for a long time, staring into the white expanse. For years, he'd chased scale and precision, measuring progress in percentages and partnerships. But tonight, in a shabby motel room in Duluth, the only metric that mattered was a child's breathing and the hum of a working heater. He turned back to see Lucy fast asleep, her fingers still resting on the snow globe. And for the first time in years, Grant Ellison let himself feel something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. Morning crept in quietly, the storm tapering into a soft hiss against the motel windows. Pale light spilled across the carpet, touching the empty soup bowls and the little snow globe perched on the nightstand. Inside its cracked dome, the red sled gleamed faintly in the dawn. Grant stirred in the chair by the window, coat still on, phone dimly glowing in his hand. He hadn't really slept, just dozed between updates from his team. Each alert had carried another layer of the night's transformation. Relief stations activated, emergency drivers rerouted, pharmacies resupplied. The system he'd built had bent under the storm, but hadn't broken. Still, what lingered wasn't triumph. It was the image of a girl lifting trays in the dark. A soft voice pulled him from thought. "You're still here." Eva was awake, sitting up against the headboard, the color returning to her cheeks. The oxygen tube was gone. Lucy was curled at her side, head resting on her arm, the sketchbook half open on the blankets. Grant smiled. "Didn't seem right to leave." Eva's voice was raspy but gentle. You've done more than anyone I've met in years." He shook his head. "You'd have done the same." She gave a faint laugh. "I could barely stand yesterday. I'd lost hope the power company would even answer my calls." Grant hesitated. "You're on record now," he said softly. "My company's relief network will flag your address for recurring support, energy credits, medicine delivery, anything you need." Her eyes widened. "Why? You don't even know us." He looked down, folding his gloves carefully. "Because someone should have. I spent years building algorithms to predict need before it becomes disaster. But last night proved what the data can't. There's no substitute for seeing it yourself." Eva studied him for a long moment. "You sound like someone who's been alone for a while," she said quietly. Grant's gaze drifted toward the window. "Maybe I forgot what it meant to look beyond numbers." He turned back, meeting her eyes. "Your daughter reminded me." They both looked at Lucy, still asleep, fingers curled around the snow globe. The tiny sled caught a stripe of sunlight, scattering glints across her cheek. Eva reached out and touched the cracked plastic. "It used to sit on my windowsill when I was little," she murmured. "I told her it snowed quiet when the world got too loud. It was silly, but she believed me." "Not silly," Grant said softly. "Hope's not a luxury, it's survival." Eva smiled faintly. "You sound like you know that personally." He didn't answer, just stared at the small hand resting over the snow globe. "When I was her age, my mother worked double shifts through a winter like this. I'd wait at the window until her headlights came through the snow. Some nights they never did. I think that's when I decided to fix things that break. Only problem," he exhaled, "I started fixing everything except people." Eva's eyes softened. "Maybe this was your reminder." He gave a small nod. "Maybe so." Lucy stirred then, blinking sleepily. "Is it morning?" Grant smiled. "Sure looks like it." She sat up and rubbed her eyes. "It's not snowing quiet anymore." He chuckled. "No, it's just snowing." Eva brushed Lucy's hair back. "We should thank him properly." Lucy turned to Grant and grinned, still groggy. "Thank you for saving my mom." He knelt beside her. "Thank you for saving me," he said quietly. Her brow furrowed. "You were in danger?" He smiled. "Not the kind you see. The kind that makes you forget why you start things in the first place." She thought about that for a moment, then said, "Mom says people are like snow. Even when we melt, we help something grow." Grant blinked, caught off guard. "She's a smart woman." "She's my mom," Lucy said proudly, hugging her again. He stood and glanced at the clock. "I need to head back soon. My team's turning this pilot into a permanent program. But before I go—" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pair of insulated gloves, child-sized, bright red. "For when you're outside next time," he said, "keep your fingers warm." Lucy gasped softly and slipped them on. "They fit." "They were supposed to," he said with a wink. Then she held up the snow globe. "Will you keep it?" Grant shook his head. "That's yours. It's your compass. You already know how to find your way." She smiled, clutching it close. "Then you need something too." She reached into her sketchbook, tore out a page, and handed it to him. It was a pencil drawing, rough but full of heart. The diner, the snow, a man and a little girl standing beside a glowing heater vent. Above them, in shaky handwriting, she'd written, "Snowing quiet." Grant's throat tightened. "I'll keep it safe." He folded the paper carefully and slid it into his coat pocket like a contract. As he opened the door to leave, the morning wind carried the sound of distant plows and the first hints of thaw. He turned back once more. Lucy was holding her snow globe up to the window, shaking it slowly. The flakes swirled, catching the light, and for just a moment it really did snow quiet again. Grant drove slowly back toward the highway, his wipers fighting a soft drizzle of sleet that blurred the horizon into gray. The storm was breaking. But his thoughts stayed with the motel room, the snow globe, the warmth of a child's gratitude, and the strange peace that had settled somewhere deep in his chest. At the next intersection, His phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Ellison," he answered, his voice steady. "Morning, boss," came the reply. It was Plea, his operations chief. "We ran the pilot protocol you authorized last night. It worked better than expected. Dispatch confirmed over 24 heat deliveries and 12 shelter transfers in the region. You basically started an unscheduled emergency network." Grant exhaled softly. "Good. Keep it running until this front passes." Plea hesitated. "There's a diner manager trying to reach you. Said you dropped a corporate card on his counter and vanished." Grant smiled faintly. "Patch him through." After a click, the man's voice came on, shaky but sincere. "Mr. Ellison, this is Carl. Carl from North Shore Diner. I don't know what to say. I didn't realize who you were last night." Grant leaned back in his seat. "You didn't need to. How's everyone?" "The power's still spotty, but the staff's fed, and we've got enough supplies to last. About the girl, Lucy, she came by this morning, brought muffins for the crew, said to tell you thank you." His voice cracked a little. "Sir, I'm sorry I let her work. I was scared to shut down, scared we'd lose everything." Grant looked out the window at the drifting snow, his reflection faint in the glass. "Fear makes people do desperate things, Carl. The point is what we do after we see the wrong." Carl was quiet for a moment. "I want to help fix this. Whatever program you're building, count me in." Grant nodded, even though the man couldn't see. "You just did." He hung up and pulled onto the service road leading back toward town. His dashboard pinged again. A notification from his company's internal hub. One of his engineers had labeled the overnight initiative Blizzard. Buddy, micro-routing for community response. The name made him smile. It was simple, human, and exactly right. At a stoplight, he glanced at the folded paper Lucy had drawn, resting on the passenger seat. The graphite lines were smudged from his glove, but the message above them was still clear. Snowing quiet. He thought about how she'd said it. Not like a wish, but a truth she'd chosen to believe. Back at headquarters, his team was already buzzing. The storm had hit statewide, and the media was calling for interviews. He ignored them all. When he stepped into the glass atrium, his assistant nearly stumbled over to meet him. "Grant, you look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," he said simply. "Pull up every endpoint in the Duluth pilot. I want every shelter, every restaurant, every local volunteer on the map by noon." She blinked. "You're scaling it nationally." He shook his head. "Locally first. We start where we were found." The staff exchanged quick glances, used to grand rollouts and global contracts, not neighborhood fixes. But something in his tone made them move faster. By late afternoon, monitors filled with live data, volunteers checking in, small businesses offering free coffee, retired paramedics logging emergency drives. The interface pulsed in soft blue, simple, intuitive, built for trust rather than publicity. Grant stood at the center, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled, his eyes sharper than they'd been in months. "Let's call it Beacon Winternet," he said. "Make it open source. Keep privacy front and center." Plea frowned slightly. "Sir, that means no investor credits." "I know," he said, almost smiling. "That's the point." He turned to the large screen that displayed a digital map of Duluth. Bright dots spreading through neighborhoods like lanterns. Every dot here is a person who doesn't have to face a storm alone. That's the metric we measure now. When the team dispersed, he remained alone in the quiet hum of the office. Outside, the snow had thinned to a gentle flurry, catching the city lights in silver threads. He reached into his coat and pulled out Lucy's drawing, unfolding it carefully. He taped it beside the company mission statement on the glass wall. Under the corporate tagline about predictive safety and AI efficiency, the child's words stood out in simple pencil strokes. Snowing quiet. Grant stepped back, studying the contrast. Corporate perfection beside human simplicity. For the first time in years, the vision made sense again. As he turned off the lights, he whispered to the empty room, Good night, Lucy. The building's reflection caught his image. No longer just a CEO, but a man remembering what warmth felt like, even in the coldest season. The next morning broke with a pale sun pushing through drifting clouds. Duluth glistened beneath a new crust of ice, plows carving slow paths between snowbanks that reached chest-high. From his corner office, Grant watched steam rise from the streets and listened to the hum of servers recalibrating under the load of new traffic. He'd barely taken a sip of coffee when Plea knocked and stepped in, tablet in hand. "You should see this," she said, sliding it across his desk. On the screen was a local news segment. Grainy, low budget, but earnest. A reporter stood outside North Shore Diner, wind tugging at her scarf. Last night, an anonymous benefactor triggered a network of volunteers that kept hundreds warm through the storm. The system, dubbed Blizzard Buddy, matched stranded residents with emergency drivers and food services in record time. Grant tilted his head. Anonymous benefactor? Plea smiled knowingly. "We kept your name out. You said no publicity." "Good," he said softly. She hesitated. Carl, the diner manager, called again. He said Lucy and her mother came by this morning. They wanted to leave something for you. Grant set his mug down. "For me?" Plea opened a small envelope she'd been holding and slid it toward him. Inside was a folded piece of stationery with a single line written in a child's careful handwriting. "We're warm now, thank you." Beneath it was a pressed red sled sticker, the kind you'd find in a child's scrapbook. He smiled faintly, feeling a strange warmth rise through his chest. "Tell him I got it," he said, "and tell him to keep the program alive." Plea nodded. Already done. The pilot spreading to 3 more counties. When she left, Grant leaned back in his chair, the city stretching white and silver beyond the window. The words on that note, so simple, felt heavier than any quarterly report he'd ever signed. He opened his laptop and began drafting a letter. To the board. Last night changed what we measure. Efficiency isn't the same as empathy. From now on, our AI won't just predict risk. It will listen for need. I've approved full funding for Beacon Winternet under community control. No press, no credits, just warmth where it's needed. G.E. He read it twice, then hit send. By mid-morning, the office buzzed with new momentum. Engineers mapped food distribution routes, designers simplified emergency dashboards, data scientists repurposed predictive models to prioritize households reporting chronic illness or energy debt. For once, the code and the cause moved in the same direction. As he left the building that afternoon, Grant pulled on his coat and stepped into the thin, crystalline light. The storm had passed, but the cold still bit. He drove toward the lakefront, where cleanup crews were clearing drifts around the marina. There, at the edge of the icy expanse, stood a small figure in a red beanie. He stopped the car. Lucy turned, smiling as if she'd expected him. "Hey!" she called, waving her mittened hand. "Mom said I could walk today." Grant laughed softly, stepping out. "You've got brave timing. Still cold enough to freeze a smile." She grinned wider, but the sky's blue again. He walked beside her, their boots crunching over packed snow. "How's your mom?" "Better," Lucy said proudly. "The nurse visits every day. Our heater works now, and the diner said I can come for pancakes whenever I want." "I'd call that progress," he said, smiling. Lucy nodded, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the snow globe. The crack had been mended with clear tape, a child's careful repair. She shook it once and the flakes swirled around the red sled. "Mom said it's yours now," she said shyly, holding it out. Grant blinked. "Mine?" She nodded. "You made it snow quiet again." That's what she said. He crouched so they were eye level, the lake wind whipping around them. "How about this?" he said. "You keep it, but when you shake it, promise you'll remember that storms don't last forever and that people can change things, even when it feels like no one's watching." Lucy thought for a moment, then tucked the globe back into her pocket. "Okay, but you have to promise too." "Promise what?" "That you'll come by for pancakes," she said with a grin. Grant laughed. Deal. They stood there a moment longer, the wind softening, the lake glittering with light. Behind them, the city stirred. Trucks, laughter, plows, and the faint hum of power returning to every block. When Grant finally drove away, the snow globe's reflection glimmered in his rearview mirror, catching the morning sun. He reached for his pocket, felt the folded drawing still there, and smiled. In the quiet of the road ahead, his phone buzzed once more, a message from Plea. Beacon Winternet now live in 5 cities. Early data shows 0 unheated homes overnight. Grant looked up at the sky, where clouds were breaking apart in soft streaks of gold. Some metrics, he thought, you don't measure. You just visit. That night, long after the office lights dimmed, Grant sat alone in the soft glow of his laptop screen. The building around him was quiet, emptied after a day of celebration. Beacon Winternet had gone live in 5 cities and already saved lives in a new cold front sweeping the Midwest. He should have felt triumphant, but instead he felt something quieter, like the still air after the storm has said everything it needed to. The hum of the servers was steady, almost soothing. On his desk lay Lucy's drawing, flattened under a glass paperweight. Her penciled figures, the man, the girl, and the little heater vent, stared back at him with a kind of truth no data set could match. A knock broke the silence. Plea peeked in. "You're still here?" "Old habit," he said, smiling faintly. "I used to stay to watch the servers stabilize. Now I just stay." She stepped inside, her expression soft. "I saw your interview draft, the one you didn't send." Grant sighed. "I don't want it to sound like PR. What happened out there wasn't a campaign. It was," he searched for the word, "a correction." Plea nodded. "Then maybe it's worth saying exactly that." He leaned back in his chair. "Do you ever wonder if we're just building smarter tools for people who forgot how to care?" "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes the right tool reminds them." He smiled faintly. "Lucy did more than any algorithm ever could." Plea's eyes warmed. "She reminded you." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, she did." After she left, he powered down his screen, slipped on his coat, and stepped into the brittle night air. The city was calm again. Plows scraping distant intersections, windows glowing gold in apartment towers. His breath rose in the slow clouds. For the first time in years, he had nowhere urgent to be. He found himself driving without thinking, guided by instinct rather than GPS. Snow crunched under his tires as he pulled into the familiar parking lot of North Shore Diner. The "Open" sign buzzed faintly through frost-fogged glass. Inside, warmth and the smell of butter and coffee wrapped around him. The same tables, same chipped mugs, but something different now, a kind of lightness in the air. Carl, the manager, looked up from wiping the counter and grinned. "Didn't think we'd see you again, Mr. Ellison." "Grant," he corrected gently. "How's business?" Carl chuckled. "Better than ever? You know that app of yours? Half my staff signed up for it. We got volunteers covering every storm alert now. Feels like the city finally works with us instead of above us." Grant smiled. "That's how it's supposed to be." Carl hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Lucy and her mom still come by. They sit right there by the window. She helps her with homework now, not dishes." Grant followed his gaze. The corner booth was empty tonight, but the thought alone brought a small ache of peace. "I owe you a lot," Carl said quietly. "You didn't just fix our night. You fixed the way we look at one another." Grant shook his head. "I didn't fix anything. I just showed up." He ordered coffee and sat near the window, the same one where snow had once pressed white and merciless. Now it was clear, reflecting the lights of passing cars. When the door opened a few minutes later, cold air swept in, and with it, laughter. Lucy burst through, bundled in her red beanie, followed by Eva, healthier, cheeks pink from the cold. "Grant," Lucy called, running over. "Mom said we might see you here." He stood, grinning. "You have perfect timing." Eva smiled, shaking snow from her sleeves. "We wanted to thank you again." Carl told us you were back. Grant gestured toward the booth. Join me? They slid in. The waitress brought cocoa without being asked. Lucy cupped hers between her gloved hands and blew steam away. Mom says we're part of something big now, she said proudly. We hand out blankets for Beacon WinterNet. I even got a badge. That's incredible, Grant said. You're helping others stay warm now. Lucy nodded vigorously. Mom says that's how you make storms smaller, by sharing warmth. He laughed softly. Your mom's right. Eva smiled, her eyes meeting his. You gave us more than heat, Grant. You gave us a second chance. We're paying it forward. He looked between them, humbled. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, she said, but gratitude still needs somewhere to go. Outside, snow began to fall again. Light, gentle, the kind that doesn't threaten but decorates. Lucy pressed her palm against the glass, watching flakes melt under her touch. Look, she whispered, it's snowing quiet again. Grant followed her gaze, the world beyond glowing softly under the diner's warm light. Yeah, he said, voice low. It really is. They sat there for a while, the man who built systems to save lives, the woman who survived one, and the child who'd taught them both what saving actually meant. And when Grant finally left the diner that night, he didn't check his phone once. The city could run without him for a while. Some storms, he knew now, and not with silence, but with warmth returning exactly where it's needed most. The next day, Duluth felt reborn. The air was sharp and blue, snow glittering like powdered glass along the sidewalks. Street crews shoveled while neighbors waved to one another, and a local radio host announced that Beacon WinterNet had been officially adopted as part of the city's cold weather emergency response. The storm that had nearly broken the region had instead bound it together. Grant stood on the steps outside City Hall, coat collar up against the wind. Reporters were gathering for a short press conference, though he hadn't planned to speak. He preferred quiet victories. But the mayor insisted. When his turn came, he stepped to the microphone and scanned the crowd. Dozens of people, some still wearing volunteer armbands. Others holding thermoses of coffee. And there, near the front, stood Eva and Lucy, bundled together beneath a shared scarf, smiling proudly. He cleared his throat. A few nights ago, I was stranded in a blizzard like the one that tested this city. I found myself in a small diner where the heat was failing and everyone was doing their best just to make it through. That night, a little girl reminded me what systems can't do, what data can't measure. He paused, glancing toward Lucy. She reminded me that when people take care of each other, no storm can last forever. So, from today forward, Beacon WinterNet will remain free, community-run, and open source. It belongs to all of you. Applause rolled through the crowd like a wave. Lucy clapped until her mittens slipped off, laughing. Grant stepped down from the podium and found Eva waiting. That was beautiful, she said. Truth doesn't need polish, he replied. Lucy tugged at his sleeve. Mom said we get to help test the new app next week. We're mapping which buildings get cold fastest. He smiled. Then you're both officially part of the team. Eva laughed softly. You sure you can handle our kind of feedback? Bring it on, he said. They walked together toward the lakefront, where volunteers were stacking boxes of blankets and canned food for distribution. The water was still partly frozen, glittering under sunlight. Eva stopped and looked at him. I've been meaning to ask. Why were you at that diner that night? You could have flown home, stayed safe somewhere warm. Grant hesitated. Maybe I was chasing a feeling I'd lost, he said. The world had gotten too clean, too digital. I forgot what it meant to see need up close. And now? She asked. He looked out over the icy expanse, then back at her. Now I remember. For a moment, the cold between them felt gentler, softened by understanding. Eva smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that reached her eyes. Lucy ran ahead, boots squeaking in the snow. She stopped at the railing, pulling the snow globe from her pocket. The crack had been mended better this time, sealed with clear resin that caught the light like ice. She shook it carefully, watching the white swirl around the tiny red sled. "Look, Mom, it still snows quiet." Eva laughed, wrapping an arm around her. "It sure does, sweetheart." Grant watched them, the image etching itself into his mind. The child, the mother, the repaired globe shining in the sun. For all his resources, all his power, that simple moment was the one he'd been chasing his whole life. Later that afternoon, he returned to his office and found a message waiting from Plea. It contained a short video compilation. Volunteer drivers delivering meals, nurses helping families reconnect power, and children waving from warm doorways. At the end, a caption read, "Because one person cared enough to stop." He sat back, emotion tightening his chest. It wasn't pride, something deeper, quieter, the kind of fulfillment that doesn't need an audience. He looked at Lucy's drawing on the wall again. The pencil lines had begun to fade, but the words remained. Snowing quiet. He reached for a pen and added one line beneath it. "Stay that way." The sun dipped low, painting the sky with fire and ice. He turned off his computer and headed for the door, knowing he'd visit the diner again soon, not as a CEO, but as a friend. Outside, snow began to fall once more, not heavy, not fierce, just soft and patient. It touched his hair, his coat, his face, and for the first time in a long time, Grant didn't rush to escape it. He simply walked into the snowfall, letting it melt quietly against his skin, as the city he'd helped mend glowed warm behind him. By the next evening, Duluth was alive again. Streets cleared, lights steady, the air crisp but forgiving. What had once been chaos now felt like rhythm. Beacon Winternet was humming. The diner was packed again, and warmth seemed to flow through the city like an invisible current. Grant parked across from the diner and watched through the window before stepping inside. The glass still bore faint streaks of frost, but the room beyond glowed golden. Carl waved from behind the counter, and the same mismatched mittens box sat near the door, now overflowing. A new sign above it read, "For anyone who forgot their gloves." When Grant walked in, the familiar bell jingled. Conversations quieted for a moment, then softened again, filled with laughter and the clink of cutlery. It wasn't awe that greeted him, it was something better. Belonging. Lucy spotted him first. She was sitting at a booth with her mother, sketching in a new notebook. "Grant!" she shouted, bouncing up from her seat. "You came back." "I keep my promises," he said, smiling as she ran over and hugged him. Eva followed, looking healthier than ever. Her skin was warm with color, her eyes bright. "We've been waiting on you," she said. "Lucy insisted we couldn't eat dessert without our storm friend." Grant laughed softly. "Storm friend? I'll take it." They sat together, and Shauna, the waitress with the red knuckles, brought coffee for him and cocoa for Lucy. "House favorite," she said, grinning. "And no work shifts required this time." Grant smiled at that. "Glad to hear it." Eva chuckled, unwrapping a scarf. "You know, she keeps telling her friends she knows the man who fixed the whole city." "I didn't fix the city," Grant said. "The city fixed itself. I just listened." Lucy held up her new sketchbook. "Mom said we could draw the diner tonight. I want to put it on the internet, so people know where it started." Grant leaned closer, curiosity lighting his eyes. "Can I see?" She flipped it open. There was the same booth, the same heater vent, but this time more people filled the page. Faces laughing, hands sharing mugs of coffee, and at the center, a small child shaking a snow globe, while the man beside her smiled. He felt something tighten in his throat. "You're quite an artist." She beamed. "Mom says pictures help people remember what matters." Eva nodded. "I tell her the same thing about kindness." Grant looked between them, struck again by the quiet strength of this small family, the kind of resilience no algorithm could model. Lucy suddenly gasped, rummaging through her coat pocket. "Wait, I forgot. I made you something." She pulled out the snow globe. The same one. But now, the cracked seam had been replaced with a thin band of metal carefully soldered across the break. Inside, the red sled gleamed brighter than before. "I fixed it for real this time," she said proudly. "It's stronger now. Mom says sometimes things that break come back even better." Grant took it carefully, holding it up to the light. The snow shimmered in slow spirals. "She's right," he said quietly. "Sometimes the cracks are what make it beautiful." He set it down gently on the table. "Lucy, I want you to keep this safe for both of us. Every time it snows quiet, you'll know we're still connected. Deal?" She nodded solemnly. "Deal." Eva's voice softened. "You know, I don't think it was an accident you stopped here that night." Grant smiled faintly. "I used to think in code and patterns. Now I think maybe some storms are meant to reroute you." They fell into easy conversation after that, about school, art, and how Eva had started helping coordinate volunteers for the Beacon Network. The diner filled with warmth and motion, and laughter rose louder than the wind outside. As the night deepened, Grant glanced toward the window. Snow had started again, light, slow, the kind that drifts without sound. He stood and walked closer, Lucy joining him at his side. "See that?" she whispered. "It's snowing quiet." He looked down at her and smiled. "It always will, if we keep watching." She nodded and pressed her hand against the glass, leaving a small print that slowly faded with the heat. Grant took one last look around the diner. The people, the light, the little world that had reminded him what mattered, and slipped his hand into his coat pocket. The folded drawing was still there, edges worn but safe. He turned to Lucy. "One day, when you grow up, promise me you'll keep helping people." "I will," she said. "And when I do, I'll tell them about the night the snow was quiet." He crouched beside her, voice soft. "That's the story I'd want them to remember." Outside, the streetlights turned the falling snow into 1,000 slow stars. Inside, warmth glowed against the glass. Laughter carried through the air, and for the first time in years, Grant felt completely at peace. Not because he'd changed the world, but because he'd finally learned how to be part of it. A week later, Duluth's lakefront gleamed under a late winter sun. Ice still clung to the edges of the pier, but the air carried a hint of spring. Hopeful, hesitant, alive. The city that had once frozen in silence now moved with purpose. Volunteers in reflective vests loading heaters into vans, kids laughing as they handed out cocoa, and snowplows decorated with banners that read, "Beacon Winternet, Neighbors First." Grant parked near the marina and stepped out, coat collar up against the wind. His breath steamed in the air as he walked toward the small community center now serving as a logistics hub. Inside, walls once bare were now lined with maps, photos, and hand-drawn thank-you notes from families who'd found warmth during the storm. One in particular caught his eye, a child's crayon drawing of a diner glowing in the snow, with the words, "Snowing Quiet," scrawled above it. He smiled. Lucy's influence was spreading faster than any code. Plea was already there, handing clipboards to volunteers. "Morning, boss," she said cheerfully. "You should see this turnout. 30 new sign-ups today, and half of them are local kids. They're calling themselves the Warm Hands Crew." Grant chuckled. "That's better branding than anything we've come up with." She grinned. "I figured you'd say that. Oh, and the diner sent soup for everyone." He blinked. Of course they did. He walked to the back where Carl and Shauna were ladling steaming chowder into thermoses. Carl spotted him and waved a ladle. "Mr. Ellison. Sorry, Grant. You've created a monster. The whole town thinks we're the Storm Cafe now." "Good problem to have," Grant said, shaking his hand. Then he heard it, a familiar voice behind him. "Grant!" He turned. Lucy and Eva stood by the door, bundled in scarves. Lucy's cheeks were rosy from the cold, and she was waving a small envelope in the air. "We came to show you something." He crouched as she handed it to him. Inside was a printed flyer. Beacon Winternet Youth Chapter, founded by Lucy and friends. Beneath it, a small tagline read, "When it snows quiet, we listen louder." Grant's throat tightened. "You started this?" Lucy nodded proudly. "Mom helped. We collect gloves, blankets, and stories. People write what helped them through the storm, and we read them at the shelter. Eva smiled. It's her idea of keeping warmth alive. Grant looked at the flyer again. That's better than anything we've ever engineered. Lucy tilted her head. You're smiling weird, she teased. He laughed, wiping his eyes. That's because I'm proud. And maybe a little amazed. Outside, the wind picked up, snowflakes swirling lazily past the windows. The light had that rare northern glow, half silver, half gold. Hey, Grant, Carl called from the counter. The mayor's here. She wants to thank you in person. Grant turned, shaking his head. Thank them, he said. This belongs to the people who showed up. He looked around the room, dozens of volunteers laughing, sharing soup, sorting blankets. It wasn't about algorithms anymore. It was about hands, hearts, and one small voice that had whispered truth through a blizzard. Eva stepped closer, her voice soft. You really changed things here. Grant met her gaze. So did you. She smiled gently. Maybe storms just show us who we are. He nodded. And maybe they show us who we could be. Lucy tugged on his sleeve. Grant, can we go outside for a minute? He followed her through the doors and into the sunlight. The lake stretched out, shimmering with fractured ice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the snow globe, the same one, the crack now nearly invisible under a ring of clear glass. Mom and I fixed it again, she said proudly. This time, we sealed it with resin from your tech lab. Plea helped. He smiled. Then it'll last forever. She shook it gently. The flakes danced around the red sled, catching the light. Do you know what I think? She asked. What's that? I think maybe it always snowed quiet, she said. We just never listened before. Grant's heart caught in his throat. You're probably right. They stood there, side by side, watching the flakes settle. The air smelled faintly of salt and pine, the city humming softly behind them. He looked down at her. Lucy, you remember what I told you about keeping this safe for both of us? She nodded. He smiled. You did better than that. You kept it alive. She looked up at him, eyes shining. You too. A moment later, Eva joined them, her arm brushing against Grant's as they stood at the railing. She handed him a paper cup of cocoa, steam curling into the air. For the man who turned a snowstorm into a story, she said. He looked at her, then at Lucy, then at the glittering water stretching endlessly ahead. No, he said softly, for the girl who taught me how. They clinked their cups together in a quiet toast, the kind that doesn't need words. And as the wind softened, the city lights flickering on one by one, the snow began to fall again. Thin, gentle, forgiving. It snowed quiet, and this time everyone listened.